Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, a podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, we feature professional Scrum trainers and other Scrum practitioners sharing their stories and experiences to help learn from the experience of others. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Hello and welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast. I'm your host, Dave West, and today we have with us one of our professional Scrum trainers, PSTs, Sander Dur from the Netherlands. He works for one of our partners, one of our PTNs, one of our training organizations that work with Scrum.org called Xebia. Welcome to the podcast, Sander.
Thank you very much for having me, Dave. How are you?
I'm good, actually. I'm good. And it's great to be talking to you. And actually, this whole conversation is inspired, or the sort of genesis of this conversation was, well, we had a conversation recently about leadership and some of the experiences you're having. So maybe we can tee this up to our audience. Talk a little bit about this challenge that you're seeing around leadership.
Yeah, I've seen this happening multiple times before, and not just on the conversations that we had before, but in multiple different areas where very traditional management that is not necessarily open to change, that feels like Scrum is maybe more for the teams, is not that supportive, becomes more of a lagging factor than a leading factor. While they should be supportive, and they could be in multiple areas, whether that's going to be setting the area for psychological safety or embracing that change in general. But if those kind of factors are not in place or misunderstood, it becomes really hard for Scrum teams to actually thrive. Whereas Scrum itself is an organizational change and not just for the people in the team. And I think you're well aware of that is a very tricky thing to work with.
So let me see if I get the crux. Yeah, it is something that I've seen, but let me see if I, just by repeating it back to you. So ultimately what you're seeing in some of your clients and some of the people you're talking to in the leadership roles and traditional management roles, in particular middle management, is that they don't think Scrum's got anything to do with them. Therefore, ultimately, not that they're in the team working on the work, but they create an environment where the team finds it quite challenging. You mentioned emotional, sort of intelligence, EQ, that sort of creating that psychological safety, creating that that space for the team. You want to talk a little bit more about, well, one, did I get it right, Sander? That was probably, is that what you're sort of focused on?
I think that's an impeccable crux. Yes.
Surprisingly impeccable is probably what you're wanting to say there.
Your words, not mine.
Yeah. So then, okay, so what happens when this happens, when you've got middle management in particular that ultimately don't think Scrum's got anything to do with them, still treat the team like they've always treated the team, and don't do anything, don't change at all. What happens? What's the negative impact of that, do you think?
Multiple things, but the most detrimental thing, what I've seen happening, that's most consistent as well, is that people don't feel safe anymore, either to try or to bring up new ideas or to be open how they feel. Or, feedback is one of the most important elements within Scrum. Feedback goes both ways. So whether that's within the team or to management setting the environment, they should be able to say, hey, I see this happening and it has X and Y impact on us as a team or me personally. But if this is not a two-way street anymore, then they'll be held back and they'd be kept at bay. And therefore their ability to deliver a proper done increment is being minimalized, which is the whole purpose of Scrum. So I think that has a lot to do with misunderstood role of leadership, how that should look like, what leadership means, because leadership is not the same as management, right? It could be, but it's not limited to just management. But therefore, the ability to deliver a proper done increment is being decreased. Therefore, they're shooting themselves in the foot, yet wonder where the shot came from.
So let's just riff on psychological safety for a second, and that trusting the team, creating that environment, the team feels that they have the support to challenge certain practices, work in different ways, approach the problem differently, work together differently, engage with outside people differently. So why do you think, I mean, it seems very sensible to trust your team, right? And it seems very sensible that you, that you would provide safety for those teammates to be trusted in that. So why don't they do that? What's the issue, do you think, really, Sander?
I think a whole lot of fear, whether that's fear of not being seen as the manager of all, the fixer of all solutions, or just the fear of the unknown in general. And I'm one of those recovered management bashers because I used to point fingers at management and say you're the issue. Until the point that I was recording a podcast with Jeff Gothelf, and he told me we got to remember that ever since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we've been training managers and bosses to do exactly that, to manage their people and to be responsible for the success of these kind of products and projects or whatever you want. And they're used to being the single wrenchable neck. And now after, say, 300 years since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we're trying to revert everything that we've been training managers to do. And they're not used to that. Managers are not used to that. And relating that back to middle management, as you mentioned, middle management, in my experience, gets to that position either by experience in their content, in their field of content, or because they're being promoted, because else they would leave the company. Therefore, they're not trained to be managers, so they don't know how to deal with that. Yet they're also not offered the right levels of support. So there's a whole new realm of failure and misunderstandings, and I don't think they feel psychological safe themselves, but they also don't get the right tools to be equipped to deal with the situations.
I mean, yes, it's funny. I also used to bash the amorphous blob of middle management, and then realized, as I've become more aware of the people that I'm working with and talking to, that they're in between a rock and a hard place in many ways. I mean, some of their fear is well founded because of the environment in which the whole organization operates. And senior leaders are driving down, when will it be done? How much will it cost? Why are you not delivering, all the time, hitting them? It's your fault. What have you done, etc. And also the ridiculous lack of professional training and support that many middle managers have. It's a travesty, really. You get exactly as you said, Andy. You get really good at a job, you hit your pay top or your pay scale top or your position top, and then, or you just get promoted because you're really good at your job, and then suddenly you've got a different job, and even worse, you're good at the thing that the people that work for you do, and you want to tell them exactly how to do that. So how do you fix that? Because these seems like massive systemic society or sort of career-y type problems. How do you fix that?
I think it begins with awareness, but maybe this is a question to bounce back at you, because you're a CEO and a product owner. How do you deal with this as a leader yourself?
I'm poorly, probably, Sander. It's sort of like cobbler's children. They sort of very bad shoes. But I think ultimately, for me, it's about clearly articulate, to focus on goals and outcomes, and to provide an environment that encourages the teams to work towards those goals and outcomes, and to continually focus on that rather than the work. And it is very tricky. In fact, funny you should say that. Well, I recently went to a sprint review, and as the guy that funds it, it was really hard for my feedback not to have ridiculous impact. I appreciate that. I realize that. Also, as the person that hires everybody and pays their salaries, I'm like in a really odd position often, because feedback could be construed it could be actually like, oh, I've got to do that, my boss told me. And really often feedback is really just, this is my perspective, what I saw. You may see a different perspective. There's no such thing as the truth. So I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And then of course, in the emotions of a sprint review or a daily or whatever, I end up forgetting it and have to then fix things afterwards. But ultimately it's about understanding the impact of my position and role on the events and on the interactions and collaborations with the people. That's what I try to spend a lot of time worrying on. So I ask more questions than I tell. And obviously you're demonstrating that now by asking a really good open-ended questions. I spend a lot of time reminding people of the hat or the stance that I'm bringing to the conversation. And if in doubt, I resort to Scrum. I kind of just emphasize the outcomes, the importance of the sprint goal, the product goal, and those things kind of help. Did that really answer your question? Oh my, I'm questioning you. Stop that. But did that answer your question, Sander? And
it does.
And makes sense.
It does. There's only one thing that I missed that I've seen you actually do, because I just came back from the face-to-face in Boston where we spent a couple of days, right? And what I've seen you do, what I miss with many leaders in their position, is at the point that you don't know, you're going to be open and say, I don't know. I need help. I need your input. Setting that, that's leading by example too. You can be vulnerable about that. You're not, even though some people like to be, you don't know everything. You can't know everything. You can't do everything. And you need other people for that too. And you got to be able to say, I don't know. Maybe I messed up. I'm sort of scared here. What do you guys think? And if you set that stage, that's going to rub off on people in a good way, where people feel more treated like humans and like they can bring their emotions to the field too and say, maybe this is not working for me as I hoped it would. It has this effect on me. But if you put that in place, it has a different, it creates a different dynamic. And I think that is what lacks a lot: compassion and empathy.
So the being vulnerable is a really interesting thing, because to some extent, I think you're exactly right. And, and I try to do that, though sometimes my ego and my arrogance gets in the way. And that's just the nature of humanity, and particularly when you're, the CEO of Scrum.org, master of all, I see. But the thing about being, sort of like being vulnerable, being humble, and the like, I think is crucial. However, there is a flip side to that we have to be mindful of, and I am very mindful of. Sometimes safety is at many levels. One of them is to know that the person that's ultimately going to pay my salary and protect it will be there for me. You have to trust your parents, and so you have to balance that need for vulnerability and answering questions of I don't know with a very clear focus on, I know what the mission is. I know what our purpose is. I know what we're trying to achieve. I don't know how to do it always. I have some experience, I have some ideas I can share, but it's balancing those two things and getting it right. And sometimes you'll get it wrong. So what I try to still do, and again, this is sort of is focus on those outcomes, focus on that mission. I accept that there's got to be a lot of vulnerability about how we do it and the solutions, because they are going to be variable. And I accept that when we learn something new, we could change the mission. But I got to believe that, to use a sort of analogy, and we're going to climb that mountain, we're going to build that bridge. And then we realize that we don't need the bridge. Okay, we realized we didn't need that bridge, so we're going to build this pontoon system or whatever. I don't know. Anyway, now I'm stuck. Does that make sense? I mean, what do you say?
It does a whole lot, and it has to do with what you mentioned on the ego as well. It's an interesting thing, because as soon as you say my ego or my arrogance gets in the way, that lowers the bar already. Like you're aware of certain things, and that puts you in a different light. If sometimes people are arrogant and they are aware that they're arrogant, but they don't want to do anything about it, or sometimes they're just unaware of their own arrogance, and then it becomes a challenge to make someone aware and what the impact is of those kind of things. Because it can be very daunting for someone who has less self-esteem to speak up to someone who is either very overcompensating for their own imposter syndrome and become very arrogant about it, or just be very antisocial, to put it like that. So it's a very delicate balance. And I think that's where the Scrum Master plays an essential role in setting that, supporting to set that environment of psychological safety, right? To make other people aware also of the Scrum values, but also take that empirical approach that this is not going to, yeah, you wanted to chip in?
No, I was just going to agree, actually. But I think you hit on something there that I don't know if our listeners, and I'm sure they all know this, but it's about transparency, right? And being transparent, not just about the product, but about the environment. So somehow making that manager, in my case, Dave, we have an awesome Scrum Master, Owen, and he does a really good job of making my behaviors transparent by some sort of either a cause and effect or and he presents it to me, and I'm like, oh, yeah. And he does it relatively quickly after it happens, so it's still fresh in our mind. And I think that transparency thing, Sander, is super important when you're helping leaders get out of their own way.
That means that Owen, I'm assuming Owen here is very much aware that you'll take that feedback for something good and not necessarily for being detrimental or just to be picky or to nitpick or to put you down, because there's a mutual level of trust. How does that resonate?
Yes, exactly. It's all about trust, really, and he does it very well. He doesn't do it. He doesn't, obviously, he doesn't does it with respect. He does it with, humor. These are some of the things that I find makes it easy for me to receive the feedback. When feedback is when it comes from an angry place, I find it much harder to receive. And I don't know if that's universally true. Some people might naturally, you have to shout at your kids to make them hear, but if it is, for me, if it's wrapped with humor and respect, then you bet I want to be better tomorrow. I want to be better today. I want to be better in 10 minutes.
It's funny that you mention kids specifically, because yes, I have 3 kids, 7 and twins of 4, and yes, sometimes you have to shout to make yourself heard. But I refer to this the whole implementation of Scrum and the Agile mindset often as teaching my kids to ride their bikes, which they're now doing. My twins, they're learning to ride a bicycle, and you can give them a bicycle without training wheels and see ya, grandma's, good luck, bye. It's going to be a horrible experience. But if you become the organizational training wheels and support them until the point that they feel confident that they can do this on their own, but gradually guide them throughout on multiple levels, right? Not just the team, but also on leadership, on setting the right environment, on the C-level, wherever, anything that applies to the success of the Scrum team, then you got to be that organizational training wheels. And it's a funny thing, because today I was with my youngest of the 2 twins, of my twins. She was scared to ride the bicycle on her own, while my other one, Nova, she just took off. And the only thing that I did to Luna, so she's the one who was having difficulties, I just put my finger on her neck, and I didn't balance her out, but she took off on her own. And the only thing I had to do is just put my finger on her neck, so she felt support, even though I didn't support her at all. Just the perceived feeling of that she is supported just made her believe in herself. And that applies so much to organizations as well. They got to be aware, and they have to know that even if something is being messed up or it doesn't go as smooth as they would like to have it, they're still being supported in whatever decisions that they make, even though the outcomes might not be the most successful or the most desired ones. They still have the sense of that safety, that there will be support when things go south.
I think I think it's super important. I agree, and I probably could do a much better job of that. When you tend to only hear from some leaders when things are going wrong. You tend to only hear from some leaders when they've heard something or whatever. You know, that sort of email, hey, would love to catch up. If you've got an environment where that is the case, then I think it ultimately isn't an environment that supports many of the values that you're talking about. So I actively try, you know, whether it's on Slack or whatever, you know, after a sprint review, I mean, it's random and I'm not as good as this as I should be. I reach out to the teammates, say, hey, that was an awesome sprint review. Thanks for sharing that stuff. I learned a lot. You know, and you know, I'm not lying. I tend to always learn a lot because, you know, I'm probably asleep when they told me what they were going to do before or something. But you know, I'm always learning, and so I really do that. The other thing that I do, which I think everybody should do, but I think it's important, is, you know, when you're on a sprint review, and we've all got back-to-back meetings and we're all busy as all hell, right? But don't be doing email. Actually give them the attention, do some active listening, you know, even if it's just for a percentage of it. You know, turn your camera on. You know, those sort of things can be very minor, but they can really show, hey, I believe in this. I'm supportive. And I think those sort of things can really help. Though you have to remind yourself sometimes to do them, and again, a Scrum Master can be really important there. Do you agree that sort of like you don't just hear from a leader or manager when things are going wrong is a very important part of psychological safety and trust and support?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. And I think also, you know, we're now discussing the Scrum Master being that catalyst of change, and you know, but even Scrum Masters need someone to be their mirror. You as a CEO need someone to reflect as well. It's a continuous dynamic between multiple people. There's not just a single one who's involved with this and ensuring that this change happens. Scrum Masters need to have their mirrors too. So I think that's a very small but important nuance, that even the leaders, even the people who are driving the change, need to have levels of reflection too. I mean, the therapist sometimes needs a therapist too.
I think they all do, don't they? I think that's kind of a rule, I think I heard. Maybe that's just in America, just to grow the amount of therapy being done. I don't know, which would be a great business model. Every therapist has to, it's like almost like a Ponzi scheme, isn't it?
Yeah,
but no, so
sustain ourselves.
Yeah, that's yeah. And if I was hiring you, I'd say, what are you saying? We're going to have to pay for somebody to provide support for you? Where does it end, Sander? Where does it end? But no, but I agree. I think the having that key reflection moment and being open to it isn't always easy, but I think is a crucial thing. So we're coming to the end of this very interesting conversation. We try to keep these short and to the point, so somebody doesn't get ridiculously bored by listening to the two of us waffling on. Is there anything, you know? So if I'm listening to this podcast, is there 1, 2, 5 things that I can do better to, particularly if I'm a manager or if I'm working with managers, to sustain this change, to drive this change? Is there anything that you would leave our listeners with, Sander?
Oh, that's a hard question.
I know, that's why I get paid the big bucks.
Yes, well, you earned them. I think that if you're going to go and do this, my own therapist always says, annoyingly, right? And I guess that's what I'm paying for, as she said. If you want someone else to change, you got to start with yourself. That's one. I hate him for that, but he's absolutely right.
Yeah.
2, I think this is a more practical thing, but I've noticed we've been doing this quite frequently, but it's super easy to do and very helpful, is start doing the TRIZ exercise coming from liberating structures on the levels of psychological safety, because it makes things very actionable and therefore more tangible. I think that's the main thing. Also, be very self-aware of what you personally are doing to display the desired levels of psychological safety. And this relates back to my first point as well. But be open about how you feel. It seems to be such a societal agreement that when you ask me how I'm doing, either I say I'm fine or I'm doing great. Other than that, there is no right answer. Because if you say, well, I'm not having the best day today, it's like, so be open to these kind of basic human needs, I would say.
Yes, I think that they're great words of wisdom. Sometimes the noise of the day gets in the way, right? And it's stepping back and thinking, hey, I've got 10 minutes between calls. I'm just going to reach out, ping somebody and say, hey, how do you think that sprint? Never start with how do you think that sprint review went, because that's automatically implying that you think it went badly. And said, hey, I really enjoyed that sprint review. How, did you, so if you do lead with a question like that, make sure it starts with positive, because otherwise you are leading the audience a little bit. I loved the points that you made on X or Y or whatever. And I think that little things like that as a manager can certainly help. They go a long way to building those bridges. And at the end of the day, we're only as successful as our teams. And, if we can't get our teams effectively working together to deliver valuable increments, to incrementally progress our product goals, then we're doing something wrong. So Sander, this was really, really interesting. I certainly enjoyed continuing the conversation that we had that set the scene for this. And I'd just like to say, ladies and gentlemen, for our listeners today, this was the Scrum.org community podcast. My name's Dave West, and I was very fortunate to be here with one of our professional Scrum trainers, Sander Dur, from the Netherlands, who works with one of our great partners, Xebia. So thank you for taking the time today, Sander.
Thank you very much for having me. Always a pleasure talking to you.
And thank you, listeners, for listening. Hopefully we didn't bore you too much. And remember, it's all about creating this environment and being true to yourself. So good luck, enjoy, and hopefully listen to other podcasts. Bye-bye.